It was 1944, and World War II would be over within a year. Charles Manship was in Great Britain, serving as director for the Office of Censorship, a government agency that controlled the public's access to information during the war. After 8 months of being overseas, 62-year-old Charles Manship was looking forward to getting home and enjoying some downtime. "I am opposed to robots, blackouts, and rockets," he said, "and am strongly in favor of orange juice and ice cream soda." His position with the Office of Censorship was rather ironic for an accomplished newspaper publisher and editor. In fact, his strong belief in freedom of the press had caused a bit of a controversy when Charles Manship publicized how then-Governor Huey Long had tried to threaten him. It was back in March of 1929 during a special session when Governor Huey Long was attempting to pass yet another tax on the state's growing oil industry, this one a license tax on oil manufacturing. Charles Manship publicly opposed the tax and strongly editorialized against it. Most business leaders also opposed Long's tax plan. However, Charles Manship's public opposition didn't sit well with the governor, who apparently thought threatening Manship would suppress all the negative publicity. Well, it didn't. In fact, Long's deceitful tactics ended up on page 1. This, gentlemen, is how your governor fights.
At one time, Huey threatened to expose the fact that Charles's brother was in a mental institution in Jackson, Louisiana, by publishing a list of all prominent people who had crazy people in their family. Charles, the next day, editorialized on the front page about the threat that Huey had made and exposed the fact that he had a brother in the institute anyway.
By the way, that tax measure failed, and Long was nearly impeached months later. Charles Phelps Manship was born in Macomb, Mississippi in 1881. While attending Millsaps College, he was a college correspondent for the Jackson Daily News. After college, he moved to Baton Rouge and was a capital correspondent for the New Orleans Picayune. He was also writing for the Baton Rouge States, but in 1909, the state's paper filed for bankruptcy. And that's when Charles Manship saw an opportunity to change the newspaper industry in Baton Rouge. So he and fellow reporter James Edmonds purchased the State Times out of receivership. The men formed a new company called Capital City Press, and they intended to instill some journalistic integrity into the partisan newspapers.
These were not great journalistic enterprises. They were rags in many cases.
Charles took the paper over. He decided he was not going to affiliate with any particular party, and he was going to be an independent voice.
Several years after their partnership, Edmonds left for another job. Manship bought out his interest in the company and continued to establish Capital City Press as the leading newspaper publisher in the state. It was such a successful venture that in 1925 he absorbed another paper, the New Advocate, which would eventually be named the Morning Advocate, his second daily paper. Readers now had a choice as to whether they want a morning or afternoon paper. Regardless of which one, Manship always believed in strong news writing, bold editorials, and community involvement.
I think it's remarkable to look at those early decisions that Charles Sr. made that planted firmly in the ground the journalistic beliefs, how he would live his life, how he would run his company with a commitment not only to make money as a business, but to do good. And when you look at even the third generation out, they're deeply involved with the community, they're still deeply involved with philanthropy, and they still take hard stands on community issues.
Charles Manship expanded into radio in 1933 with the purchase of WJBO, the first radio station in Baton Rouge. WJBO would become the industry leader in radio news in the state. In 1941 came WBRL, the first FM station in the Deep South. The Manship family would continue to grow their media empire and in 1955 purchased WBRZ Channel 2. And like their papers and radio stations, WBRZ would eventually set the standard for television news in the South.
And it was because of not only the commitment, but the financial investment that they made in all of those properties. As a community, we've enjoyed that. We've benefited from it. We probably have taken it for granted at times.
When Charles Manship wasn't in the newsroom, he was out getting involved in the community, playing golf, fishing, or hunting. His favorite, heading up north.
Canada, Alaska, of course all around the United States, I'm sure.
Charles Manship loved the outdoors. He enjoyed gardening, in particular growing roses, which adorned his home on Kleinert Street, a landmark home that he and his wife Leora had built in 1928. Charles and his wife Leora had 4 children. Two of the children, Charles Jr. and Douglas, would eventually take over as owners and managers of both the TV and radio stations, as well as the Capital City Press. Charles Manship had established himself as not only a credible publisher and editor, but also as a civic-minded business leader. He supported a number of nonprofit agencies, including the Red Cross and his own Goodfellows organization, which helped thousands of local kids enjoy Christmas. Manship also spent time making sure the next generation of journalists were taught how to report the news. His favorite pupils, up-and-coming Cub reporters. "You have to appreciate what a newspaper is," he said. "You must realize that the very lifeblood of a newspaper is its news."
One of the things that he believed in was that the editorial page, although it was a very strong opinion and would influence some people perhaps, that the most important part of the paper was the general news columns.
In 1947, Charles Manship died at the age of 65, believed to be a result of a sickness he initially contracted while in London. But his death came long after he had already established himself as a reputable publisher, editor, and community leader. And today, more than 60 years after his death, his newspapers and broadcast stations carry on that Manship tradition.
Our family has always believed that news is what it is, and you don't bend the news to fit your own personal beliefs. It's just not what journalism should be about. And my grandfather believed that and brought up his sons to believe that, and they brought us up to believe that.
His influence on future journalists who come through that school every day is profound, and it will last forever. And as a journalist, I can't think of a better legacy to say, I ran my businesses with the highest integrity to journalism while I lived. I instilled that in the generations that followed me, and I have used my influence, wealth, and commitment to journalism to play a small part in training future journalists to carry on the tradition. And so as you sit in the Manship School and honor Charles Manship Sr., that's a wonderful, wonderful legacy that we all ought to celebrate and appreciate.